This is Nicole Jones at Farrell House, located on West Virginia State University's campus, Institute, West Virginia, interviewing for Your Voice in History Project Life. I'm now interviewing Richard Leon James, known as Casey. Okay. So you want to go ahead and... You want to go ahead and say your name and age?
Yeah, my name is Richard Leon James, better known as Casey James. I'm 74 years of age. I was born February 8th, 1938 on Wirtz Avenue in the east end of Charleston. And I finished Garnet High School in 1955, the year before the last class in Garnet High School, which was 1956. And I'm familiar with the block. I used to hang around the block when I was a kid, and of course I delivered newspapers in the area before I finished high school. And shortly after finishing high school, I went to the military. I spent 4 years in the United States Air Force. I was a crypto operator. I spent 26 months in the Far East. Played football and baseball and ran track. And when I came back to the United States, I worked at the Pentagon for a year before actually getting out of the military in 1959. In 1964, I joined the Charleston Police Department, and I served 28 and a half years on the Charleston Police Department. And I went from a basic patrolman and retired as a captain in the police department. Actually, I was what you would call a front runner or a history-making person there on the Charleston Police Department. I was the 4th black sergeant in the history of the police department, which dates back to the 1880 something. I was the 4th black sergeant. I was the first black director of the juvenile division after making sergeant. And shortly after that, I was the first black lieutenant in the history of the Charleston Police Department. And shortly after that, I became the first and only black chief of detectives in the police department. And in 1988, I became the first black captain, first and only black captain in the history of the Charleston Police Department. I retired, as I say, with 28 and a half years. I retired as the Operations Bureau Chief for the Charleston Police Department. It was a rewarding career for me. I enjoyed every minute of it because I think I had to focus on why I was a police officer. I've always been service orientated, always liked to help the public do what needs to be done, and it's like the Air Force. I spent 4 years in the Air Force. It sort of made me grow up to be a man. It's the best 4 years I've spent. And the police department was the same way. It was a rewarding career, and it was well worth the 28 and a half years that I spent on the department. I'm a 69-year member of the Allen Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is located on Wirtz Avenue. I'm the Grand Master for the Royalcraft Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Ancient York Masons of West Virginia. Let's see. Some other things, I'm having a senior moment right now, but some of the other things that...
Maybe who were your parents and what did they do?
My mother was Mildred Cates, and my mother was not married when I was born. As a matter of fact, my mother had 5 children before she ever got married. She didn't get married until the 5th child was an adult. And I was the oldest in the family, and I have 3 sisters and 1 brother. And my baby sister is a surgical nurse. She's one of the head surgical nurses at CAMC General Division. And 2 or 3 days a week, she's in charge of all 28 operating rooms within the department. I have 2 sons and 2 daughters. My oldest daughter is a homemaker here in Charleston, West Virginia. My youngest daughter is a human resource director for one of the leading court reporting companies in the state of not in the state, but in the United States of America. She does a lot of traveling from her home base, which is in Powder Springs, Georgia, to California and vice versa. My oldest son is a 24-year highway patrolman in Nevada, and my youngest son is a 2-month corrections officer at the Mount Olive Corrections Institute.
Let's see. Did you have any aunts or uncles or cousins that you were close to also, or that were in your?
Yes, I came from the case. My family is sort of mixed up. You'd have to hear what I have to say to understand what I'm talking about. My mother was not married when I was born. My father was married to another woman.
Oh.
And my mother's father, my grandfather, who was uneducated, but he was a very moralistic, a lot of morals to be back in those old times when, keeping in mind that he was born in 1874, just 9 years out of slavery. And he had 10 daughters, and he didn't believe, although he didn't believe in educating his children, because I guess he grew up under the old school that back during his time it was against the law to teach black kids to read and write. So he didn't believe his children going out and having babies out of wedlock. So one of my aunts had a baby out of wedlock, and he told her that, this is according to history, family history as it was told to me, told her not to bring any more babies in. This was in 1936, so he let that go by. But a year later, this same aunt had another baby, and they made her put the baby up for adoption.
Oh.
And the baby was adopted by people who lived upon Cold River in Boone County in that area. But the family never lost track of the child. And later on, the child came back to the family, or the family came back to the child. But this was in 1937. So in 1938, when my mother got pregnant with me, with this married man, my mother wouldn't tell her father who my father was, because I guess she didn't want to expose them, so she just made up a name and put it on my birth certificate, a name Frank James. And nobody ever heard of Frank James, but she wouldn't tell, but I guess because of my grandfather and because of him being married to a prominent family there, so she wouldn't she wouldn't give his name out. So I ended up being Richard James on my birth certificate. But actually I grew up as a Cates all through my life, early childhood. I grew up as Richard Cates. All my school records and my little work records that I had during school were in Richard Cates. So when I went to join the Air Force in 1955, I had my birth certificate. I had seen my birth certificate 1,000 times, but I never paid any attention to the name James that was listed as my father. So I took my birth certificate and the application in to the recruiter, and he looked at it and he said, well, who are you? And then he showed me what he was talking about, and then it dawned on me. And that's when I became Richard James that day, so it was too late to do anything different. So I just went and got another application and filled it out, Richard James, and went to the Air Force. And from that day, April 1955, I became a new person. And I've often thought about that. I had to make plans of what I would tell my children about who I am, of where I came from. This is a new name. You can't go back any further than me. And I asked my mother one time when I came back from the military, why did you put Frank James' name on my birth certificate as opposed to putting my real father's name on there? And she didn't answer the question. She never answered the question. So I came from a family, and back during those days, if you ask the question, you don't get an answer. You leave it alone. You don't ask that question no more. So I never asked that question again. My mother died in 1979. And it's a question that, the answer really wouldn't make a whole lot of difference, because it didn't change me as a human being. I'm who I was then, and just a slight name change. So it really didn't matter. So I'm comfortable. Comfortable with it. I've been comfortable with it all the time.
Yeah.
But I think about it sometime, and I just wonder about the dynamics of how families can influence certain things as you go along in life. How my grandfather, who didn't believe in education, but yet still he was just a man who had a lot of morals, and he didn't believe in his children doing certain things, and they were Christian people, him and my grandmother both. But I think about that sometime. But it's still, I look back and I say, well, I'm who I am anyway. It hadn't changed me. I've had a full and complete life so far. And I'm still enjoying it. And even though the name, I thought about Shakespeare. I used to like to read Shakespeare all the time. So in Romeo and Juliet, there was a part where she's saying, "What's in a name?" And he says, she says, "Neither hand nor foot, nor arm nor leg, nor any other part belonging to a man, that which we call a rose by any name will smell as sweet." So I've always thought about it in those terms. So
that's good.
I was comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So I went along to life. Life has been good to me. I'm 74, and I'm shooting for 100. But I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I've had not a perfect, but childhood. I had a good childhood growing up. I grew up in Wirtz Avenue, where it was just a compact neighborhood where everybody knew everybody, and you couldn't do nothing without somebody knowing it, because you get a whipping, and you usually get a whipping when you got home.
Yeah.
And a couple of years ago, I wrote a book about Wirtz Avenue. It's called In the Holler. And it just portrays life growing up in the Holler, and what a nice place the Holler was. A lot of people didn't like the Holler. A lot of people from other parts of town always said the Holler was a no good place. The people from there were no good. But we've had 4 lawyers to grow up there, 3 doctors, 1 medical doctor and 2 PhDs to come from the Holler. And then the Holler had 11 police officers to join the Charleston Police Department from that one street. There was 10 blacks and 1 white from that one street, Wirtz Avenue, to join the Charleston Police Department. Wow. Then you had other people like my son who was a Nevada Highway patrolman. Then you had several other people who belonged to joined the Kanawha County Sheriff's Department, and one person even went on to be. I think he worked for ATF, I believe, federal government. But out of those 10 blacks that came from Wirtz Avenue, 3 of the highest ranking black officers in the history of the police department came from that area, came from that street right there.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
Since your mother wasn't married, did she have a lot of help from the community or like within the family raising you all? Or?
Well, my mother worked, she was a domestic. She did day work. She cleaned people's houses, made $3 a day plus bus fare. And, we managed, to get along. I don't know that she asked the community or the community came in. I'm sure that people back in those days gave food to certain people. We never went hungry, and we always had clothes to wear. It wasn't always the best, but it was just a life so full of things now that people wouldn't even, in this day and age, wouldn't even understand. We had the church, and of course we had other community gatherings where people would come together. And then my mother, as I say, made $3 a day plus bus fare, and that went a long ways. And we lived in a little 3-room shack up on the hill, and the rent was only $6 a month. So we didn't have electric in the house until I was about. I think I was about 14 years old by the time we got electric in the house. And we used to bootleg electric from the people next door. And my mother would just give them something on the electric bill. And we had a outside toilet up on the hill. And we had cold running water in the house. And we had gas in the house, in one room in the house, gas stove in the kitchen, and a gas light in the ceiling. And the other 2 rooms, we burned coal and burned wood. And I often wonder why the house never burned down. It was just a little shack with wood on the outside, cardboard on the inside. You know, that's life for me. The Lord must have looked out for us. He had to, you know. So.
Yeah. So was religion very important then?
Well, you know, my mother said she would never make her. My grandmother and grandfather were religious,
Right.
and they belonged to the. My grandmother belonged to the Baptist church. Of course, my grandfather died when I was 23 months old, and I never saw him. But when I came along, my mother, you know, she put that name on the birth certificate, and she moved out of the house before I was born. And we lived with some people in the community as a baby coming up. But apparently he let her come back to the house. So I was born in a house where they live, and he died when I was 23 months old. And this is just history that's passed down through me, you know, to me. But my mother said she would never force her children to go to school. Go to church. But I lived where I lived. The church that I belong to now was right down on Wirtz Avenue, the hill for me. And I started going there because all the girls in the neighborhood was going there. And I just grew up in that church. And everybody else went to the Baptist church. I still go to African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I sang the choir. Of course, I couldn't sing, but I was there, you know.
Yeah.
And I was singing one time. My mother told me to shut up. So, you know, if your mother tells you to shut up, you know you can't sing. But my sisters all went to the Baptist church, and my grandmother was the mother of one of the Baptist churches that was in that area. But my mother, as far as I know, didn't attend church.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she didn't attend church. But my father, my real father, was killed in the military. He got killed in 1943. He was in the Navy, and he got killed. And they were sort of prominent people.
So she didn't tell you the name, but she did tell you of him.
Well, she never really told me about him, but other people did, and my aunts and his brothers and his sisters and brothers all knew me. You know, they knew of me, and then the people in the neighborhood that were friends with my mother and with him, they all knew each other, and that's how I come to find out that there was no such thing as Frank James. You know, during that time, and I did research when I joined the police department after I learned the research, and I found no history of a Frank James in that area. But all the people that grew up with my mother and father in Wirtz Avenue, they knew who my father was. And one day, I was passing papers on McKee Avenue, and I used to like to talk to old people, you know, when I was passing papers, and I'd always like to have a conversation with them, just try to learn and hear about their experiences. So this old gentleman had moved to Wirtz Avenue to live with his sister, who had lived down the road from us for a long time. So he was sitting on the porch one day, so I stopped and was talking to him. And you know, he was been in the coal mines all his life, and he just retired. So we were talking and about what I want to be when I grow up. And I said, well, I want to be a fireman or a policeman or something. But two things I don't want to be. I don't want to be a coal miner, and I don't want to work in a chemical plant. So he looked at me and he said, well, it's funny you should say that. He said, I took your daddy in the coal mines one time at 8 o'clock in the morning. So 9:30 that morning he was gone. Never went back in the coal mine again. So my mind started clicking. I'm scratching my head. And, how does he know my father? You know, how does he, you know, he didn't know me. But then he told me some stories about the family, the Clemens family, of which my father was a Clemens. They were friends in Mount Hope, where my father graduated from Du Bois High School. And they had been friends, the family had been friends up there. And he knew that he was my father. And he'd been living down in Wirtz Avenue probably for 2 or 3 years, but he knew this. And it just blew me away when he told me that, you know. But like I say, everybody in the neighborhood, I was probably about 14, 15 then when he told me that. But everybody in the neighborhood had been telling me all my life who my father was, you know. But my mother never would answer, never would say it. And I answered that one time and she didn't answer. I never asked again, you know. But I saw my father one time that I can remember. He got killed in April of 1944. And I was at my grandmother's house, And he came to see me one Sunday night. He was evidently on military leave because, as I remember, he had his Navy uniform on. And he came to see me that Sunday night, and never seen him again after that. Because when they had the funeral at the local church in the Hollow, they didn't open the casket. And some of the people say, "Well, you look just like him." I say he couldn't deny you if he wanted to. But some people, his mother didn't really think a whole lot of him going out having a child out of wedlock. And of course, his wife, she knew that I existed, and she always treated me nice. I would see her and she would speak, and she'd give me a nickel, a dime, a quarter, something. But she was always nice. But then one of his sisters was one of my favorite aunts. She was a poet, and she wrote a lot of poetry for me. And she really loved me. And then one of the other sisters had a photograph of my mother and I taken down on the block when I was I guess I was 2 or 3 years old. So she said, "I'm going to send you that picture one day," and one day she actually sent us the picture. And I think my sister that lived in Indianapolis got all the pictures from the family there, and that picture's in there. And but by and large they like me, all except the grandmother didn't put up. I don't guess she didn't like me because of the fact that he went out and had a child out of wedlock. From what I understand, he was a good man. He went to school here at West Virginia State College, and he graduated from Du Bois High School, probably in the early 1930, 31, and then he went to school here before he joined the military. But all in all, I had a great life. I had a good life. I can't complain about anything.
That's good. Who took responsibility for various chores, like the cleaning and washing? Did you do any gardening or?
No, I never had a green thumb. I think my mother tried to grow some things. We had a little space on the back side of the hillside. The next door neighbor always had a garden, and he always shared stuff with us. And I think my mother may have planted some tomatoes or something, but I couldn't grow anything. I had an aunt one time. She said, "Just put it in the ground, leave it alone." But they died. I tried to plant some tomatoes and they just died. I just don't have a green thumb. And as a matter of fact, when my mother died, my sisters, all these plants that my mother had, she had a bunch of plants, and all these plants she had, my sisters made me take them. And I said, "Well, I don't want these things because they ain't gonna last long." And they took them all to my place. 6 months later, they were all dead. And I killed a cactus. If you kill a cactus,
That's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. But she had a little garden, and then everybody in the Hollow at that time, back in those days, had gardens, and people would share what have you. They used to kill hogs and right next door, and it was always a pleasure during November around Thanksgiving to watch them kill hogs. And we used to just go around and just sit around watching.
Did you all eat family meals, the meals together?
Yes, by and large we did. My mother would fix meals, and sometimes I never did see her eat. And I'm wondering when did she ever eat? But we always ate. And maybe she was eating in the other room somewhere. Maybe she usually ate after we did. But I never seen her actually sit down and have a meal.
Maybe she was eating while she was cooking.
Yeah, she could have been doing that also. Yeah, we had food to eat. But my sisters and I, we sit down together and eat. But a lot of things, I was a pretty picky eater, and she said, "Well, if you don't eat it, that's all you get this evening. You don't get nothing else."
So how was Christmas?
Christmas was always a good time for us. Like I said, we didn't have electric, and I used to go up on the hill, and a lot of guys in the neighborhood did the same thing. We go up on the hill overlooking Works Avenue, and we cut Christmas trees down. But back in those days, where we lived, you'd have to cut 2 trees down because the side of the tree that faced the hillside didn't have any limbs on it. So you cut 2 trees down, put them together, and tie them together, and then That's what your Christmas tree was.
Aw.
And then we had made our own ornaments and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Did you use like popcorn or did you do the paper?
they did little paper things.
Oh,
Because and then we would get little things for Christmas. Not a lot.
yeah.
We'd get little things for Christmas. We always got something.
Yeah.
Cap guns, football, or
Mhm.
baseball, or something. And my sisters always got dolls.
Oh.
And I remember my two sisters and my brother, their father, who was dating my mother at the time. I guess I was about 12 or 13 years old. And I never had a bicycle before of my own,
Mhm.
We used to take bicycles and take parts off of bicycles and build a bicycle. So he bought me a bicycle for Christmas. As a matter of fact, he took me on vacation
Oh.
with him when I was about 10, 12 years old. So I never forget this old green Firestone bicycle. Had a horn on it and all that stuff. So he took the bicycle around to my grandmother's house and put it under the house. This was probably the 20th of December, just before Christmas.
Mhm.
And I found the bicycle. I knew he was gonna get it,
Mhm.
but I found where he had it stashed at. So one day when my grandmother went to work, I went around and got the bicycle out and rode the bicycle up and down the road. At that time, the road was muddy and what have you. So the bicycle got all muddy, and I didn't have sense enough to wash it off. And my grandmother came home, and evidently, I don't know what made her go down and look, and she said, "You had this bicycle out?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she called my mother and went around the road. Well, we didn't have a phone. Went around the road and told my mother.
Mhm.
So my mother got mad and said, "Well, you're not gonna get it for Christmas."
Oh.
So I told him when he came down, I told him what had happened, and he told us, "Say, give up boy that bicycle." So I got by with that, but we always got something for Christmas, just.
Yeah.
If it wasn't a whole lot of toys, we always got something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Did you all celebrate Easter or
Yeah.
do anything for 4th of July? Or?
Easter was a big day.
Mhm.
Actually, it was a big day in the holiday. In my book, I talk about how on Sundays the playground in the holler would be nobody would be on the playground until after church was out,
Mhm.
and then on Easter morning you see the little girls coming with their hair curled
Oh.
and little dresses and what have you on. And of course we didn't have a lot of clothes. Usually when I sang in the choir I had one white shirt and a tie that my mother used to wash every week so it would be clean. We didn't have a lot of things, but
Yeah.
we enjoyed what we had.
Mhm.
And it was, we always watched the Easter parade and Easter egg hunt after church was over with,
Mhm.
So we had pretty good celebrations. And in the Thanksgiving, we always had food for Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
And
Was it the typical turkey?
yeah, typical turkey, typically, yeah. And like I said, it was a hog killing time about that time, and people passed hog meat around or what have you,
Mhm.
And Ben next door to Reverend Mason, she always got some of that too, But I never went hungry. We never went hungry. We always had something to eat, and always had clothes to wear. Sometimes we would go to the rummage sale. She'd go to the rummage sale and buy stuff. And then some of the people she worked for, like for instance, they had a son who was probably about 2 years older than I was, and I got some of his hand-me-downs. And of course, I used to wear knickers. They call them knickers. I used to wear them and high socks. And the guys used to laugh at me because I'd be the only one dressed like that, But that's what they wore, and I got his hand-me-downs, So I had to wear them too,
Oh.
Yeah.
Let's see. Do you recall anything about weddings or baptisms or anything of that sort?
No, weddings. There were people that got married, but it wasn't no big deal for us. And I remember when in the AME church back in the day, I didn't get baptized. I got sprinkled. What they call was sprinkled. It's the same thing as baptism is today. But I don't know when my sisters and them got baptized in the church. I'm sure they did, but it wasn't no big thing back then,
You already mentioned your home. You said it was a one-room?
3-room. We live in a
3
3-room house, yeah. With a front room, a middle room, and a kitchen.
Oh, okay. What kinds of things would your family do together for fun?
Well, at night we'd all be at home, and I guess we just played with one another. We didn't, we had a few toys that we would play with, but generally at night, when she turned the lamps down, it's time to go to bed. But I always wanted to slip off and go down on the playground in the daytime, and that's what I would do. My older sister would be home. She'd had to iron and things like that. But I'd always slip off and go down on the playground till my mother come home, and then she'd make me come back up on the top road then. But we were a close family.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
That's good. And so where did you attend school?
I went to Riverview Elementary School, which is on Wirtz Avenue, and went to Boyd Junior High School, which was located on Jacob Street, and then went to Garnet High School. Then I graduated from West Virginia State College in 1975.
Okay.
And I worked on my master's degree down at Marshall. Still working on it. I haven't completed it yet. And of course, when I joined the police department, I attended in-service training. As a matter of fact, I taught in-service training, but I had about 37 different classes of continuing education. I've been to the University of Maryland, University of Florida, Marshall University, University of Delaware, University of Louisville, and these homicide schools and burglary schools and what have you, and all continuing education. I've been to 37 different schools while I was on the police department.
Wow. What was your major?
My major here at West Virginia State was criminal justice. Yeah. Cum laude graduate, 1975. I missed magna cum laude just by a few points. I took a couple of classes at the end of the semester because I didn't need the credits, but I just took them by examination. And one class I made a C, and that just threw everything out.
Oh, no.
And I was just trying to run the GI money out, the GI Bill money.
Is there anything in particular that you remember about Garnet?
Today I'm the president of the Garnet High School Alumni Association, and I rewrote the history of Garnet. When I came onto the Alumni Association, the history was scattered all about, pieces here and pieces over there and pieces there. So I got all the information and pulled it all together. Oh, cool. And that's the history as it stands now. But you heard Ms. Pickle out there talking about some of the principals we had. Garnet had 4 principals during its time, and I pulled it all together and put it in the history form. But history was my minor in college. I always loved history.
Yeah.
I always loved history, and there were some great days at Garnet. I had some good days and some bad days. I found some things at Garnet that I didn't agree with, but and I spoke out about it when I first joined the Alumni Association at a reunion, the Garnet reunion. We've been having reunions since 1947, and now they used to be every 5 years, then cut it down to every 3 years. And now we have a reunion every 2 years. So we're gearing up now for the reunion in 2013. And there's a couple of things at the school that I didn't agree with, but yet and still that was part of life, And mainly what I'm speaking of is prejudice, racial prejudice. Light skinned versus dark skinned blacks. Blacks come from one parent family as opposed to a 2-parent family, what have you. I ran into some of those issues, but you as a young kid, you see these things, you feel it, you become part of it, but you don't have recourse at that time, so you just go with the flow. And after you finish, you think about these kinds of things, and you ask yourself, what could I have done to make things different, which wouldn't have been a lot at that time, So, but these things did exist, and I mentioned that at one of the meetings there, and And I guess after I mentioned that, everybody understood what I was saying. After, nobody's ever said it. But I was one who can't keep my mouth shut. I like, if a red car is red, I'm gonna call it red. I'm not gonna call it blue.
Yeah.
But I like to tell it like it is. And after I started talking about it, then other people realized what I was saying, and then they understood that it did exist, and we dealt with it, and that's what it is. But I never had the opportunity to attend school with white kids until I joined the military. And I always thought it was kind of bad because some of the white kids that we played with that lived there at the holler, lived in the holler, in the mouth of the holler. We'd play together in the summertime, and we'd fight, and we'd be friends the next day. But then when school started, they went to one school and I went to another. And then, I understood it, even at that young age, I understood it. But really, I understand it more fully now than I did back in those days. I always asked the question, why? But then we were getting books. The black school system wasn't as prosperous as you would want it to be. We were getting books from the junior high schools, and even in high school, we were getting books from them that they were advanced as far as we were concerned. But we could read and write, but we had to work with what we had, and we got those books that were probably 2 or 3 years old, but we got them. That's what we had to deal with. And I remember one time when I was doing a research paper in high school, I couldn't go to Canal County Public Library to get a book.
Oh my gosh.
They would send the book over to the library at the school because we wasn't allowed to go in the library. And I was thinking, well, my mother paid taxes.
Yeah.
And, when she would buy a loaf of bread, she's paying taxes. They have to support that. But that's just the way things were back in those days. But it was difficult. But, we managed. We had a system of survival. And that system was always there. And, you couldn't get around it. But, you just work within the system and try to make things better from within. But otherwise, Garnet High School was a lovely time for me.
That's good.
Yeah, I enjoyed every minute of it.
Good.
One or two of the teachers I didn't like too well, but I
You'll
enjoyed.
have those.
Oh yeah.
So what about the block?
The block was a center of activity for black people back in those days. A lot of business places and nightclubs, the hub of entertainment, and people would come through Charleston, going from south to north, or back to south, or coming from north, going back home. They'd always had to come through Charleston, and the block would be well known. Even people in North Carolina knew what the block was, because people already been there. But it was a hub of everything. All the black businesses were located there, and hub of entertainment, and you didn't need to go anywhere else. The house of prostitution was right next door to the school, actually, but you would never know it unless you knew up front that this was a house of prostitution, because the women that worked out of the house, they never came out on the street to bother the kids. I've never known one incident where anybody came out of the house to bother kids, as we would go up and down the street going to eat lunch, down to the drugstore, down to a little Greek place right around on Washington Street where we ate lunch at. But, just so much activity there. And when integration came along, we lost all the businesses, lost all of that. And the only thing that was retained in the block was the barber shops and beauty shops. And we had a movie there, and they had a hotel there. But I was the one who, Joe Tawry and I were the ones sit down and made this scheme of all the business places that were located there, just from memory, because he used to hang in that area, and so did I, And of course, I went to school there, and we remember a lot of things about the block itself, and that general area.
Yeah. So you used to hang out there too, huh?
Well, yeah, as a kid, we'd go down to the drugstore. We didn't have any place else to go. Go down to the drugstore and get a hot dog or or get some ice cream or what have you. And walking from Salisbury Street, which was his real name, to the Holler, Wirtz Avenue, was just just something to do. We had a car, or sometimes you ride your bicycle down there. But walking, we'd walk to the west side. We had a theater on the west side. We'd walk from Wirtz Avenue all the way to West Charleston to go to the movie. But as kids, it didn't matter. It didn't bother you.
Yeah.
Kid, we'd run that far and wouldn't even be tired.
Well, before we conclude, do you have anything else that you wanted to say or talk about?
Well, I should have been prepared. Let me see. I think that it just seemed like you get a special feeling when you walk down Salisbury Street or when you go to Salisbury Street. I still go there. The Garnet's alumni building is still on Salisbury Street. As a matter of fact, we're in the house where the house of process. Yeah, it's the only house there now.
Okay.
Right beside the parking lot of the church. And that's where the house of prostitution was. It's 413 Salisbury Street. So the Alumni Association has that building. And at the time, First Baptist Church, which is across the street from the school, was out on Washington Street where the post office is. And if you went down Salisbury Street, went down the middle of Salisbury Street and crossed Washington, you would walk right into the front door of First Baptist Church. So then First Baptist moved up there on Salisbury Street probably when I was in the military, probably during the late 50s. And it was there when I came back from the military in 61. And we had the Black Hospital right across the corner from Garnet. And eventually the lodge that I belonged to, we owned the building at one time. Excuse me, because we had a lodge in there at one time. Excuse me. But just so much history that's there.
Yeah.
And it's gone. The only thing you have is memories of it, And I still remember it because, like I said, I was always interested in history. And, being like that, I guess I just kept a lot of things in my mind about the place. And we were able to put this scheme together and number and then put the names of the business that were located there. But it's pretty interesting once we finish the project, I guess.
Yeah.
Have you seen that scheme yet?
No, I have not.
Okay. Well, Anthony has a copy of it, and I'm sure that Mr. Lucas has a copy also. Yes.
I'll check that out, definitely.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Well,
It's a privilege.